Hello, I'm going to talk to you about cultural and natural resource management in Northern Australia, just to give you some background. And just some slides first to give you a bit of a perspective of Australia about where the Indigenous population lives. So you can see that the largest Indigenous population in Australia is actually in New South Wales. So a lot of Indigenous people living further south are living in cities and urban situations, and in the north a lot of people are living out in the bush. But this slide shows you something about complexity, that you can't have one policy for Indigenous Australia. It's very different. And these are the discrete Indigenous communities. So you can see where predominantly Indigenous communities are. And again, does one size fit all if you're developing a policy? Now this is Aboriginal-owned land in Australia. So you can see that a lot of the desert was given back. Why do white fellas need deserts? You know, you can't have cattle, etc. So it goes back. But this amounts to approximately 20% of Australia. So 20% of Australia is now in Indigenous ownership. So this owning land brings with it problems. Now this slide shows you the bioregions. So the bioregions are areas of biodiversity significance, and they've been rated here from high to low. So you can see the pinkish, really pink colour, that's deemed to be of high biodiversity value, and when you overland Indigenous land over that, you start to see that a lot of the land that is now valued for its biodiversity is on Aboriginal land, Aboriginal-owned lands. Now things like this biodiversity wasn't valued in the past. It was pastoral grasses, minerals, these sort of things, and with climate change occurring in ecosystem services and talk about these things now, you can see that the value of the land that Aboriginal people hold is slowly rising. Now, this is what they call a wilderness quality, not that I like the name wilderness, but we'll look at it in terms of the extent of land disturbance on Indigenous lands. So again, you can see the Indigenous lands are very intact in terms of biodiversity or disturbance. And the Northern Territory, in fact, only has 6% of its land cleared, compared to Victoria that has something like 69% of its land cleared. So again, this is starting to show the value of this land. But then everyone lives down on the east coast of Australia. That's where the predominant population is. The land, the desert, everywhere has basically been seen to be sort of undervalued. What's the point of being there, type of thing. And then again, if we're looking at the riparian zones as well, Aboriginal land becomes near pristine again in terms of the rivers and the waterways. Now, if we go back to look at the Northern Territory, where I've been working for the last 7 years, if we look at the population, it's only 200,000, so it's much smaller than the ACT. And the Indigenous population is about 28-29% of that. 72% of the population live in these urban centres here. And predominantly it's white people that live in the urban centres and Aboriginal people that live in the bush. So there's two worlds in the Northern Territory. And another thing to think about the Northern Territory, particularly Darwin, is it's got a very transient population. White people that live there, a lot of them don't stay for a long time. So why there's a lot of talk about itinerants coming into Darwin from the bush, when I was living there I used to think it's people like me who are the itinerants in Darwin. We're not staying there long, 3 to 5 years, and then people are moving. So there's a huge turnover of this population. Now the voting in the Northern Territory is won in the northern suburbs of Darwin, where the most seats are. So again, you're going to see that democracy fails minorities that are living in the bush. And when these people are living there, they want exactly the same services and things that they have in Sydney and Melbourne, with populations of 3 or 4 million. And how does a little town of Darwin of 100,000 do that? Well, the money starts to get spent in town and not in the bush. And you can see things recently where they built this big wave pool down at the waterfront in Darwin, which you wonder why. So Aboriginal people own about 42% of this landmass, and 85% of the coastline as well as an Aboriginal ownership. And again, this map shows you this white area through there is the land that is valuable in terms of pastoral production for cattle. And so you can see Aboriginal people have got very little of that land back. The land that they have got back in some of those places, like the Nicholson Block or the Robinson River over to the east there was land that Aboriginal people bought back and then turned into Aboriginal land. So you can see straight away how the land was valued at the time of colonisation and then what was given back or won back. And now I've just got some pictures to show you the landscape because many of you live down this way and maybe have never been. So this is the Nicholson block on the NT-WA border. You can see it's a huge, vast landscape. This Aboriginal-owned land is 12,000 square kilometres and there's probably about 10 people living on it now. Everybody's moved off and gone back into Doomadgee where there's services. This is North East Arnhem Land, so you can just see the diversity of the land. This is coming into Maningrida with the floodplains. So the floodplains are incredibly productive in terms of biodiversity. This is an outstation again on the Nicholson block, the Wanyugarua land. It's not permanently occupied, this one. And there's about 8 houses at this homeland or outstation. Here's another outstation in North East Arnhem Land. So you can see there's more houses, and if the photo was taken up higher, you'd see that it is a larger place. Again, this is a homeland or an outstation. Here's another one at Kopawonamere in the Arnhem Land escarpment that was only started about 5 years ago and has been highly significant in the carbon projects and firework that's going on, and it's very remote, established by an 80-year-old man. So it's another type of outstation. And here's another one in cattle country at the bottom of the Nicholson block. So just from these images, there's different, when you hear of outstation, it's not one house in the bush. There's communities, some are small, some are occupied for longer periods of time. Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory and a lot of Australia have high mobility between outstations and into the service towns or Aboriginal townships. This is a photo of Maningrida. Now, so when Aboriginal people won the land back, it wasn't like New Zealand or Canada when people win land back, that they got compensation for the loss of that land. The land was handed back, and then with it all of the problems came. So there were, I'll go through it a little bit later, about lots of feral animals, invasive weed species that are starting to change that landscape. And so Aboriginal people started to do something about it themselves. The Caring for Country program was a community-based initiative of people seeing problems on their country, developing partnerships and starting to work through it. So what it's about, you can break it down into 4 things: into fires, trying to stop the wildfires from destroying the country, particularly in areas where Aboriginal people have been moved off country or haven't been able to re-establish themselves back on the country. Weeds, you'll see later what I'm talking about, but weeds are costing the Australian economy $4 billion a year in lost production. So it's a huge problem. Feral animals, well, there's close to 1 million camels, hundreds of thousands of horses, pigs, cane toads, donkeys, goats, buffalo, and they're all slowly destroying the fragile landscapes of the north. And then wildlife utilisation, people looking at ways to make money off their country that doesn't impact on the environmental integrity of that country. It's about developing businesses. And what this is about, it's about developing the capacity of the people to look after the country, which is empowering and cost effective, as opposed to external agencies coming and looking after the country on behalf of people, which is disempowering and enormously costly. And there's great examples of it out on the floodplains at Gunbalanya and West Arnhem Land, where every year the Northern Territory Weeds Branch would come and spray thousands of dollars of chemical on the weed, mimosa. Next year it would grow back. They'd come and do it. Each year they'd do it. Nothing. It was just slowly growing over time and sucking up lots of money. It's only when Aboriginal people themselves developed it using the spray but also using burning to get on top of it that those weeds have now started to reduce. So in the Northern Territory, in the top half of the Northern Territory, there's 36 land and sea management programs that are in operation. So you can say that probably about 50% of Aboriginal lands in the Northern Territory now have some form of formalised Aboriginal land management. There's a lot of places where Aboriginal people are still living on country in North East Arnhem Land or West Arnhem Land, where a lot of this activity was done. But what I'm talking about here is where it became formalised, where people are starting to wear protective clothing, get vehicles to brand themselves, and starting to build partnerships to start to do things on a two-way basis, using Indigenous ecological knowledge and also working with scientists about how these two can come together and be and get results.